This is Conversations with the Citizen. I am your host, Tia Carol Jones. I'm here today with Emmy Award Winning Journalist, Adrienne Bankert, and co-host of NewsNation's Morning in America?
That's right.
Okay.
Very good, Tia.
Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much, Tia and Janice.
Thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Where do you want me to start? That's like which area of life? Because it's like you're the holistic person, right? There's the show, there's the personal life, there's the journalistic journey. So do you want me to talk about life in Chicago or prior to?
Talk about your personal life.
Okay.
Before you got to Chicago, yeah.
So I've been a journalist my whole career. There's only been a couple of times in my entire working life that I didn't work a job in TV. And all of those jobs were in restaurants. McDonald's drive-thru, I like to say my first broadcasting job was a McDonald's drive-thru as a teenager. I did some retail at Macy's and Ross, Dress for Less. And then I worked as a waitress at an Indonesian restaurant in Manhattan Beach, California for 3 months while negotiating a deal for my first TV news job, which was in Sacramento, which was essentially my hometown. Then there was one blip in the radar between that and working for ABC News, where I was a hostess at a restaurant. Other than that, every single job I've had, I really haven't applied for. It's just television is such an interesting world where if somebody hears about you or somebody sees your video, you know, your tape, they used to call it, they don't really make tape anymore, they would say, hey, are you open? Are you under contract? But I'm the oldest of 7 children. Nobody in my family was in television. So I had no experience with how to get there except for my education at the University of Southern California, where I started hosting shows. I ended up parlaying that into a show host for an educational children's program in Los Angeles for a PBS affiliate. And then I knew I had to start news if I wanted to get really good, because I knew news would make me work a lot. And anything you practice, anything you do over and over again, you become better at, right? Your 10,000 hours, like Malcolm Gladwell says. So I've gotten my 10,000 hours a few times and love living in Chicago. I mean, honestly, it's the biggest surprise of my life to come here and immediately feel at home. Immediately feel like this was a gift to me with a big red bow on it to live in this city. And your life goes in different twists and turns, but you enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. When did you know you wanted to be a journalist?
Oh man. I knew at age 12 that I would do television. I was watching Oprah, just like all kids do, I think, from a certain generation, and I thought I could do that, you know. I think that it was just something inside of me. I remember telling my mom doesn't remember this, but I distinctly remember I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was eating. I was having watermelon. I was sitting on the carpet watching TV. Too close. You know when your mom would tell you, get back, you're too close. You're going to hurt your eyes. That was me, and I knew I would do television. I just didn't know how I was going to get there. And it was a lot of people along the way who invested in me, opened the doors, gave me a shot. You know, I just was on Instagram Live, and my counselor, my junior college counselor, who called me into her office, she saw me walking on campus one day and said, oh, hi, you know, introduced herself. Her name was Carla. And she said, come talk with me. What are you doing here? And I told her how long I'd been there. It'd been like 2.5 years. And she was like, oh, no, you got to get out of here. You got to transfer somewhere. She drove me down to USC personally with her little son in the car and introduced me to the campus and took me around because I did not know. And my mom raised 7 kids on her own, so she didn't have the time. So a lot of what I did was just trial and error. And thankfully, a lot of tour guides, a lot of angels along the way.
How do you provide fair and balanced news coverage in today's news environment?
So, you know, there's a man, he actually lives here in Chicago. His name is Bill Winston, Forest Park area, leads a gigantic church and all kinds of things, ministry, grocery store. He owns like a shopping mall. I remember hearing him years ago. I don't even know where I heard him, but I remember him saying something that this video came across my Facebook feed or somewhere, and he said, "Be a thermostat, not a thermometer." And it's hard, but we all have to come to this place, or choose to come to this place, where we don't get affected by everything around us. We set the temperature, we set the tone, we set the atmosphere. And I believe that all of us have the opportunity to do that, have the power to do that. It's just about harnessing that power, knowing that power. We live in a world where a lot of people are afraid. So anytime you have fear, just like any drug, it's a chemical response. You act differently when you're afraid than you do when you're not. When you're fearless, you act differently. And so the way that I cover the news is to come from a place of fearlessness. Even if it's an area that I'm not as experienced in, I just step into it and say, okay, I can either come at this with feeling like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to have enough research for this conversation, or I can come at it with curiosity and speaking from a place of, I'm a viewer just like you in the audience, and I can hold the microphone for you, the person watching at home, and act and be, not act, but be as authentic and inquisitive as possible, because I'm not there to be cute, and I'm not there just to sound credible. I'm there to hold a microphone for the audience. So that's how I approach it. I think that too many people try to sound credible, try to sound fair, try not to offend anybody. None of those things work. You really have to come at it as a service, and not be afraid of talking about things that people are sometimes nervous about.
Why did you write the book, Your Hidden Superpower, the kindness that makes you unbeatable at work and connects you with anyone?
So I was working for ABC News in New York, and was traveling all over the world. I mean, I got to travel to Prague and Budapest and Tokyo, and interview celebrities, and it's very glamorous, or it sounds like it, right? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of sleeplessness. It's a lot of being ripped and run around. I mean, when I covered the boys in the cave, if you remember the soccer team, I want to say it was 2018, that got trapped in the cave.
I remember that.
And I was in Hong Kong interviewing Dwayne Johnson for his latest movie, Skyscraper. And they had kind of given me a heads up, like, hey, if we sent you to Chiang Rai, Thailand, would you be open to it? Sure, yeah, absolutely. Not knowing what I was in for, not knowing how long I'd be there, I ended up spending 2.5 weeks in Asia. It was a lot, but being a part of those kinds of stories, it was very imperative that I learned how to flow with different personalities. And my mentor, he authors the foreword of the book, Your Hidden Superpower, he was like, Adrienne, you have a different perspective on kindness than some people I've met. So why don't you write a book on it? And I'm thinking, can I write an autobiography or something? And he said, you haven't lived long enough to write an autobiography, so no. And so I didn't. I wrote a book on kindness, and I wrote it really quick, like in 8 months. It just poured into me, just different stories of people being kind to me. Because when you're in a foreign country, you rely on kindness. When you are in a new environment, when you're in a hostile environment, covering a story that's potentially dangerous or incendiary, just the tone, you really rely on other people having, watching your six, having your six, I don't remember what the term is right now, but you know what I'm saying, watching your back. And I just told different stories. I told different stories of people, watching my back, whether it was in the field or it was looking for a new job. And nobody's perfect, but when you have somebody be kind to you, it actually makes you look at them like they're the greatest thing. They're the greatest person. I was thinking about it today because I always talk to the security guards at our building, and I was like, why do the security guards and I have such a good rapport? I mean, I do talk to them and I do know all their names, which I'm sure a lot of people, you walk in and walk out of a building, you don't necessarily ask for the name of a security guard. And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back at all. I'm just using it as a simple example. Them seeing kindness displayed in a way where most people might be too busy, I've always done this throughout my career, is something where I might need their help one day. Whether it's watch me when I'm walking into a dark lot, or, oh, your car is here, or something. Who knows? Unlock my office because I locked myself out. and they come with a quickness. But I was reflecting on this just this past month, and I thought, why do I have such a good relationship? Part of it is home training. Part of it, my granddaddy was a security guard in the last years of his life. When he was in his 80s, he was still working as a security guard. And we've seen older people do that job because it's mostly a desk job. But I just thought, maybe that's part of it, that I remember my grandfather and was so close to him. And maybe that's why I think I know what you're going through. I've seen that, and I have empathy for that. And just those lessons of empathy I've had along the way, have, they colored the book. They colored these stories that I shared in that book, Your Hidden Superpower.
What do you hope people take away from reading the book?
Well, I take away the same thing I want other people to take away is you got to pull the book out a couple more times. You don't just read it one and done. Somebody said, "Oh, you authored the book on kindness," and I'm thinking, yeah, well, don't put me on a pedestal because I need to read my own book too. I need to be reminded to be kind. I need to be reminded to slow down and pay attention to the people around me and not just be about deadlines. All of us need to have reminders because whatever you don't remember, you can get lax in. It's kind of like driver's training. How many of us just kind of do what we do? And then we go and take the test and we're like nervous because we haven't been doing what they teach us to do. And I think that kindness is, I say to the book, it's not elementary. We've treated it as something that you teach children and then you grow up and should know better. But the fact is that just like children, our brains need that constant muscle memory of how to be treated and how to treat people. And so my hope that what people get out of the book is you're going to need it as a little manual. Every once in a while, maybe just crack it open, read a couple pages or read a chapter and be like, okay, let me calm myself down because people are acting off the chain. They're acting crazy and I need a reminder of kindness in my life, And that's what I think.
You've interviewed a lot of people. Who was the person whose story stayed with you the most, and why did it have such a lasting impression?
Oh, that's a good one. I've interviewed a lot of people and had a lot of lasting impressions. I always mention Brad Pitt because I tell people this story. I met him because of one of his movies, Ad Astra, which came out in 2019, I think. And we interviewed him, and I remember people being excited that I was interviewing him because he's such a hot guy. And I remember telling people, calm down. Not just because if it was a woman, we wouldn't accept that behavior from the opposite sex, right? But because I said, if I look at him as a sexual object, then I'm not going to be able to really connect with him. And that's true of anybody, right? If you just look at somebody like a piece of meat, you're not connecting with them. You're trying to hook up, but you ain't connecting with them. And so I said, just be easy. And while we were talking, and you can find this interview, it's still online. It's one of my favorite moments because he says something and I ask him, I interject, I ask a follow-up, and he stops, kind of surprised. And it's like, oh, and I say, I'm listening. He's not, a lot of people of high rank are not listened to. They're meat. And they're used to being treated that way. Whenever I interview somebody, I don't care if it's the couple that I met today who visited 200 Costco locations around the world, and they wrote a book about the joy of Costco. I love them. They're passionate, they're devoted. They both individually loved Costco, and then they found each other, got married, and go to Costco's while they're on vacations. Whether I'm interviewing them or a Brad Pitt or Vice President Pence, who I interviewed today as well with my co-host, I treat them like they have a stroke of brilliance. And so in meeting these different people, I can tell when they're not treated like they're geniuses. And Brad Pitt is not just a pretty face. He's a very smart man. You don't judge a book by its cover. And I said to him, what did this movie, I think I asked something about what did the movie teach you? And he says, well, me and the director realized we have more years we've seen more years than we have left. And just hearing Brad Pitt talk about mortality and how brief time is. I mean, you look at him, he's still very attractive, he's still a working actor, but in his mind, he released a little bit of that temporary moment of, oh, this is limited here. Like this time here is short. And I may have 20 or 30 years left as opposed to the 55 I've already lived. And just to put that in perspective, I mean, when you're young, you don't think about that. And you think of him as still young, even though he's in his 50s. And I think you're in your 50s, you are still young. But that stuck with me because A, I learned something about him that I didn't know. And B, I learned something from him that I could apply to my life. If it doesn't matter in 100 years, it doesn't matter.
So, as I said in the introduction, you're the co-host of NewsNation's Morning in America.
Right.
How have you been able to bring parts of yourself into the newscast?
Number one, I worked with my boss at Good Morning America in New York. So I'm grateful to be known. It's something when you walk into a place, which I did, frankly, because he got hired after me, but walked into a place and nobody knows who you are. You don't know who knows you. And you walk in and there's somebody who actually has seen your work, understands your method, respects your work. Like, that's just awesome. So being able to not have to explain myself, not have to explain how I conduct storytelling is just such a load off my back. So I think that's a number one way that I bring myself to the job. I also think, and I've talked about this more recently, you oftentimes in journalism school, you're taught the methodology of journalism. But in that quest, a lot of journalists act as though they can be unbiased simply by choosing to be and willing themselves to be neutral. But we are a whole person, and you bring that whole person into the job with you. You might, it's kind of like somebody who knows multiple languages. Like, you might be fluent in English and Spanish, right? When you go into a situation where you need the Spanish, you employ it. But you have it with you. It's part of who you are. If you don't need the Spanish and you speak English, you go into a situation, you just speak English. It's the same thing, I think, with different facets of our personality, whether it's where we were raised. I was raised in a rural community, so I bring that to the table, but I always love the big city, and I've lived there, and I bring that to the table. And every day I'm thinking, how do I speak? And it's really not that hard because it's who I am. Can I speak to people in the city and people in the country? They all want the same thing. They just have different demographics or different geographical locations. But I employ all of who I am. I just did this huge special, an hour-long special on the Chosen series, which tells the story of Jesus and his disciples. And I was talking to a group of publicists, and I said, why would a cable news network do a story on a Christ-centered biblical story of Jesus and his disciples for an hour on their network? And it's newsworthy. But so many people who watch, who are in the middle, politically, geographically in our country, they believe in God. They go to church. If they don't go to church, they were raised in church. So it's applicable to them. To say, we have to have a separation of all discussions of religion and all discussions of faith because we're in journalism has been such a limiting belief for eons in my field, when the fact is there are people who believe in God and don't think it's taboo to talk about it. So there's one thing with reporting on faith stories and another thing with, trying to force something down people's throat. You don't have to do that with anything. You shouldn't do that with politics. Unfortunately, there have been some instances of media outlets pushing, jamming, proselytizing a political agenda. And that's unfortunate because that should never have happened. But you take the whole of who you are and you bring it to the job every single day, and you're okay with that, rather than thinking I have to compartmentalize myself into this little box because I'm neutral. But that's not how we act. We don't act like that when we go to our favorite Chinese restaurant. We just say, no, I won't have egg rolls today. But it doesn't mean that we don't enjoy everything else in the buffet. So I hope that explains it in a long, long way. How I bring myself to the job is I'm not afraid to bring all of me to work. I just have to know when to pull what tools out of the toolkit.
That's a great point. What are some of the ways you have been able to give back to the community?
Well, it's funny. kind of at a full circle moment when I was sitting here because I don't know if you guys know of the Sacramento Observer in Sacramento, California, black-owned newspaper. They're celebrating their 60th anniversary this year. So my friends there, I've participated with their events and anniversaries, and I'm a friend of the editor, and I believe I'm going to be out in Sacramento for their 60th anniversary. But I was looking at the Citizen, and it reminded me of them. Just, some of my roots growing up. But I have always been involved in the community philanthropic works. In Sacramento, my hometown, I would fly back from New York or from Texas when I lived in Dallas or LA all the time just to volunteer to give back. I just did it this past weekend. And I think it's important to never forget where you came from. Here in Chicago, if I can help get a story on, that's one of the ways that I believe I serve the community. If there's a way for me to show that a community cause has a national impact or has a relevance to the national audience that we're serving, then I believe it's part of my service. It's not official. Nobody gave me that title or that job description, but I believe it's all of our jobs to shine a light on stories that don't get told. And so, yes, I do love community cleanups. Yes, I do love supporting some of the outreaches that I've been a part of here in Chicago and in California. I mentioned Dr. Bill Winston early in this broadcast, but he has this huge campaign. I don't know if you guys saw it, 10 cities, and just went everywhere. And they did this expungement, and I was fascinated by them actually wiping out people's records so that they could get work again. And again, I'm not saying all this to pat myself on the back. I made a donation to it because I think that, there are so many people who feel that their past will never allow them to move into their future. And I know how that feels. I think all of us know how that feels. Whether it's a past that's, on somebody's record books, a past of criminal behavior, a past of bad relationships, a past of failing or feeling not good enough. We all carry that burden. And it's like, man, yeah, let me donate to that because I understand needing to just wipe the slate clean of different things that have happened in life that are disappointing or mistakes. And so I think that it's crucial to be involved. We have another organization. They happen to be right across the street from our office. And somebody told me about them. I said, okay, I'll walk over there and check it out. So hoping we get them on TV, a nonprofit that's here in Chicago that helps the less fortunate, those who are in need, with school supplies and coats and things like that for the winter. So you use the tools that you've been given, and you could, anybody can go out and pick up trash. Some of us can actually tell a story, and tell it in a respectful way.
What advice would you give other young women who aspire to go into journalism?
I'm like, there's such a long list. I'm trying to give you a shorter answer because I've been talking so much. I would say the first piece of advice I would give is get a mentor. Get somebody who cares about you with no strings attached. Somebody who can invest in you in terms of, your soul, your mind, your confidence, your esteem, your etiquette. I had different people along the way that I called my fairy godmothers and fairy godfathers who would just take me under their wings and give me advice for how to conduct myself as a young lady. I believe that took me farther than I'd ever go if I just tried to go it alone and trailblaze and start a YouTube channel in my bedroom. And because a lot of young people, they have the technology and the tools to start something, and they know how to use it, and even can have a greater audience than some of these career, media personalities. But I think that when it comes to the common sense of life and how to conduct yourself in public and how to have conversations and how to be comfortable at a networking event or at a cocktail or at a mixer or at a gala, I don't think it's old-fashioned to have that kind of training that they may not have gotten from a mom or dad. So that would be my number one piece of advice. Find somebody who will invest in you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's in TV. It could just be somebody who sees the gift in you and sees and believes in you. And that could be anybody. I had a woman when I worked at Hewlett-Packard Computer Company out in California. I was 19 years old. She walked in, and she's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, I'm Adrienne, and she's like, well, how long have you been working here? And I said, oh, a few months. Okay, well, you're going to start helping me. And she had foster children. She worked there in community engagement, and she just would give me tasks. I was not assigned to work for her. I was working for somebody else. I was actually a contractor, but I let her invest in me. And I just said, yes, ma'am. And Naola Johnson, if you're listening, Naola, I just want to say hello. But she came into my life for a season, and she gave me advice by living an example. She did not have any television savvy, nothing. But she was kind to me in a tough love way, in a mama way, and just helped open a door for what was possible. She took me to my first Toastmasters event where they had a professional baseball player talk about his tribulations and his trials and how his career was over, and then he surged to become this great national public speaker. And just looking at him, I said, I'm going to do that one day. I'm going to do motivational talks. And that's what I do today. I give keynote speeches, and I speak to schools, and I speak to corporations, and I tell them about my story, and I tell them how to be fearless. But when I was 19 years old, Naola Johnson, she showed me that it was possible.
Where can people go to purchase the book and find out more about you? Mm-hmm. And where can people watch your show on NewsNation?
So to buy the book, you can buy it wherever books are sold. It's sold on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. And you can also contact, there's a local bookstore in Sacramento called Family Books and Gifts. If you want an autographed copy, if you contact them and order it there, I'll make sure to sign it when I'm out in California next time. But they can find out more about me by going to my website, adriennebankert.com. They can also follow me on Instagram at ABOnTV. I am on Facebook as well at Adrienne Bankert. And as far as NewsNation, a lot of people have it on their television, they just don't know. So if you go to newsnationnow.com and go to Channel Finder, you put in your zip code, it pulls up every station from YouTube TV, Apple TV, DirecTV, Xfinity, Hulu, I believe, still runs us. So there's a myriad of ways that you can watch. There is also an app where you can listen to the show on the go. All you have to do is click on listen, because we are on 4 hours every Monday through Friday, live. So 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. local time. And just check out the show. I'm really proud and in a humble way, I'm thankful, I'm confident, I'm grateful that we get to bring the whole of ourselves there. We don't politicize headlines. We give both sides of the story, or 5 sides of the story if it has 5 sides. We allow people to share their voice without being combative or being vilified. And that, I think, is something that we all need. Can we have common sense conversations again around particularly hot button issues? Because there are things, politics is very personal. And the topics that we're facing today are even more personal than they've ever been. So not to take it ever lightly, but to respect people in the room. Because otherwise we're going to be all upset and angry and fearful and throwing things. And that ain't cute in 2023.
Right. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like our audience to know?
Just how sweet y'all are. And thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. And I'm trying to think. Oh, I would say, USC is playing Notre Dame, so if anybody's going to the Notre Dame game, holler at me. Holler at your girl. But yeah, I might be doing something with the Black Alumni Association of Notre Dame in a couple weeks ahead of that game, just talking about how to stay in the zone, kind of with the football theme, how to stay in the zone in your life, personally and professionally, but maybe you'll be able to jump in on that. Maybe they'll let you in. But I'm usually doing talks or events or book signings or something. So look for me.
Okay.
And I'll be glad to say hi to you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This is great.
Remember to tune in next week for Conversations with the Citizen, the place where real news can be heard.